Good Tuesday to you, everybody in Com 710. Welcome to week boom 10. We're back. Modular week is over. Back to business as usual, trying to stay motivated and sufficiently caffeinated. What do we have here today by way of cup? Over spring break, modular week, whatever we call it, I conducted a writing workshop and lecture at the University of Missouri, sponsored by the geography department. Yeah, I know one might not necessarily connect writing with geography, but within the field of geography, there is really something very close to cultural anthropology. And anthropological narrative, which is very close to what we do, sort of qualitative anthropology. There's a professor there who does it and very good, he does it very well. I had a good time, and I got this cool merch. So, all right. How's everybody doing? How are you holding up the semester? Okay. I hope you did get a little bit of a break because, we all need to, as hard as we work. All right. So a couple of bit of housekeeping items before we get to your readings from week 8 and talk about those. Your second class presentation is due March the 24th. So that's about, a week and change, 10 days. See the assignment folder. This one, there's no chapter assignment from any of the texts. You get to pick a religious entity, something that has a media component, and talk about it, present it to the class, okay? And all the details are over in the assignment folder. All right, so you should all have your papers back, part 1, with comments to me. So if I've asked you to contact me in your paper, please do. I mean, a number of you have already, and that's great. Because remember, what we're doing here, it's instructional, right? We're here to develop each other's skills as professional thinkers, researchers, and writers. So, nobody's going to get beat up and nobody's in trouble. You'll notice in your papers, my comments, they will likely only run maybe 3 pages. 3 pages into your, not my comments will run 3 pages. 3 pages into your paper, and that's because when I'm besides typos and things, what I'm looking for are trends, things that you're doing over and over that's working well, and I'll say, hey, good stuff here, and things that you're doing over and over that's not working well. What I need you to do is when you see those, think universality. Think, I've got to look through the entirety of my paper for these kinds of missteps and fix them all. So you get your paper back or you take a look in there and there's no comments on page 5. And you go, oh wow, it's perfect. I'm not saying it isn't, but it may not be, because what you need to do is to read for the kind of remarks that I made on pages 1 through 3 or 4 or whatever. Okay. And if you have any questions or you want to spend a little time with me talking about the comments and how, what do I do with this? Office hours, I am there from noon to 2 Eastern Daylight Time. Now, what's left? The rhyme and reason for daylight savings revolves significantly around some of the western states, namely Colorado, because they feel it would just be too dark. I'm starting to believe that sounds like a personal problem to me. Colorado, that's too bad for you, because the rest of us don't want to mess with the clock. Sorry, get that off my chest. Okay, now for the paper, because you're not doing 2 papers, you're doing 1 paper. You're not doing 2 papers, you're doing 1 paper. The instructional sheet for part 2 is also in the assignment folder, and your final paper is due April 22nd. All right, so you got well over a month. Now I put out an announcement during modular week or just before modular week asking who might be interested in a Zoom seminar in which we talk about writing a paper. And you know what we'll do is we'll talk about writing in general, and then writing as it's specific to an academic piece. Okay, and I'll have a little presentation for you, and then we'll have a Q&A, slot. Many of you expressed an interest in that, and I'm glad to hear that. So what I'm looking for now is, a time, a scheduled time, and I want to be able to pick something that accommodates everyone as much as possible. So I'm working my schedule. This week is a very, very busy week for me, including up and through the weekend. But I think, I think maybe like a week from yesterday. So like next Monday. Okay. That's what I'm aiming at. But I'll send out an announcement asking, hey, would this work? Okay. All right. So make sure that you look and, download the instructional sheet for part 2. It has all the details as to what you need to do next. Final finished paper, April 22nd, 400 points. Okay, let's go back if we can. Now what? 2 weeks gone. That's like forever in a class like this. And let's take a look at the questions, the things that I threw out for you. The theme, if you want to put it that way, for week 8 was I want you to get into the habit of being critical of what it is that authors say, and the claims they make, and then the evidence that they put forward to substantiate those claims. More so than any singular thing. There are a lot of things that you're trying to do in becoming a doctor. All right. But perhaps at the top of the list, it is imperative that you learn how to sort out and determine beef from BS. That is, just because something's in print and just because it's in a journal, that doesn't mean diddly. What are the hypotheses? What are the research questions? What's the research model, the method? What kind of data did the author use? How has that data been analyzed? What kind of conclusions did the author put forward, and do those conclusions stretch out beyond the capacity of the data to support them? You should be, the sort of the top of the list of things you're trying to learn is learn that skill set of evaluation to be critical, because number one, that's how you're going to be of use to the community or wherever it is you land once you finish with your degree. And number two, that's at the core of what we're supposed to be doing as doctors of communication. We're look, you're never going to memorize and know all of the, various theories and authors, and you'll get more acquainted with it as the years go on. Yeah. Okay, the main purpose of the degree is not to memorize all these things, although you have to sort of build a core of knowledge. But the main purpose is to develop those critical evaluation skills, and then the skills necessary to synthesize that evaluation and present it to the audience in a way that makes sense. All right. So I wanted you to start thinking, this week 8 about how it is that authors are presenting their stuff, and some looking at things from angles that people may not necessarily think about them. So let's go to question number 1. In chapter 1, Desovietizing Russia Media Studies, Vartanova notes that as far back as 2005, 2006, Russians showed a desire for moral censorship of the media. Get online and see if such a sentiment is still pervasive in Russia, and it is. So many of you pointed that out. Can you identify another non-Western country in which such sentiment prevails? And there are a lot, but the key question for this question that I wanted you to focus on was this last bit. Do people have a right not to see, to read, or hear certain things? Now, a number of you, I think you missed the question, or you missed the point of the question. I'll give you a couple of examples here. Mimi, in my opinion, people have a right to see, hear or read certain things. Hence, in our country, we have our First Amendment, freedom of speech. However, there is an order to freedom of speech, and what I assume you mean by that maybe is there's certain limits. Okay, yeah, great, that's true. But the question is, do a people have the right to tell their government we don't want to see this, and a majority rules say okay, the government okay, this is not allowed, and takes it off, turns it off, doesn't allow it to be posted. Chandra, so you asked the question, do individuals have a right to hear and see certain things? Okay, that was not the question. The question was, do they have a right not to? Okay. Lauren, when you think of people, do people have the right not to see, hear, or read certain things? I'm certainly not in support of political censorship or muting the voices of adverse opinions. However, I think there is an argument that if there are things that prove to be a safety risk to the nation. Okay, see, nope. We're not talking about safety risk. We're just talking about if a people decide for whatever reason, this is not to be seen. And, whether there's a minority, or however, in terms of the populace, I don't mean some sort of a racial or ethnic sense. There's a minority that says, well, no, we want to see that. Do the people governing themselves say, have that right? Say, no, not going to happen. Okay. So Derek, you were among the few folks who I think got at the answer here. Do people have a right not to see, hear, or read things? My answer would be, it depends. Okay. Does a Christian who believes all humans are created in God's image have a right to ignore things about human suffering? Okay, so that's sort of a different question. That is, that's self-censorship, but we're getting warmer. At the same time, should a person engage in things related to human suffering when they will be emotionally harmed or unable to do good? In general, I would say yes, people have a right to decide what they see, hear, and read. Like all rights, it should be stewarded well. Okay, meaning, do you mean like by the person or by the government? Okay, so everybody look at that question again, because the crux, the nub of it is, do people have a right to elect a government? And you'd say yes. And then through that government, do they have a right to say, we don't want to see this, don't allow it? And then it's not seen. Okay. That's, an angle to speech, free speech, the exercise of freedom that's not often considered. That is, we tend to think of the exercise of a freedom of a right in an affirmative sense. I have a right to say this, I have a right to see this, I have a right to do this. What about the exercise of a right in not an affirmative, but a confirmative? I have the right to tell my government that I don't want this, and I don't want this seen, and I don't want this known. And I want to be confirmed in my desire not to have it, and anybody else for that matter. So let me have you revisit that question, at least, in your think space. Okay, number 2. In his chapter, The Struggle for National Legitimacy, Banerjee asserts Asian media studies also continue to live in the shadow of the Western models. This has to be a great extent. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm having a hard time reading the question. Prevented Asian media studies from coming of age and establishing itself in international arena. Okay, so what I asked you to do is you have to complete the chapter, consider the question. Did the author provide evidence to support the premise? What other factors may have contributed to the delay of Asian media and media studies from coming of age? I'm going to get right back to that here. In answering this question, consider the religious, governmental, societal structures of such major Asian countries as China, Russia, other countries of the Soviet Union, Pakistan, India, Saudi Arabia, etc. Okay, now this is an excellent example of what it is you're trying to do, the skill you're trying to develop as a doctor in communication. And that is, take a critical look at what an author is saying. Before I get to your answers, when you read stuff like this, first things first, all right? Now, we're not pointing any accusatory fingers at the author here, but let's be on the lookout for what in the advertising world is called weasel words. That is, words that seem to say something but don't really say something. The classic set of weasel words that's often used to make this example are virtually spotless. This dishwashing detergent gets your dishes virtually spotless. What does virtually mean? One spot, one spot per 10 dishes, 10 spots per dish. What is virtually spotless? Or virtually spotless in the sense that you think of a virtual environment, that the the spots are there, but not really. They only seem digitized. Okay, so when we read this question, um, and we read that that they're prevented from coming of age. Well, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean competing financially with Western media sources? Does that mean developing a robust media training program? What does coming of age mean? I mean, they use this analogy. This is sort of an analogy to like an individual moving from childhood to adulthood. Past the age of majority. It just doesn't tell you a lot. Okay, so watch out for that. Anthony, we'll take you first because you went first on this. The assertion Bernardi used to discuss the struggle for international liberty reflects an overall aim of this international media studies. Okay. Let me get down to your contributing factors to Asian media studies delay. According to the author, some factors that might have contributed to these media studies from coming of age include governmental influence. Okay. It was noted that governments generally control and regulate media channels and content because Asian media is used essentially as an instrument for national development. Ta-da! So this is in no way related to what was the quote? Living in the shadow of the Western model. Because if the Western model means the government stays the heck out of the media or else, then they're not really living in the shadow of the Western model when they use media as an arm of the government, which they do in all of these states. So, for example, I'll put this link in the announcement. Consider the case of Dr. Wei Wenliang. And who was Dr. Wenliang? Well, he was an ophthalmologist living in Wuhan. And he started noticing people pouring into the hospital where he worked with some very peculiar symptoms, which looked like SARS to him, South Asian respiratory virus. And he was like, or syndrome, I guess, respiratory syndrome, RS. And he was like, yeah, this looks like an outbreak of SARS. And so he posted this on social media. And for his trouble, he was dragged in front of the police and then in front of the court and forced to sign a statement that he was spreading false rumors and being a disruptor of the social peace. And so, as you point out, Anthony, there are a lot of individuals from these major Asian states that come to the West to study media and communication and never go back. And the reason that they don't go back is because they end up as tools of the government, or if that doesn't suit their fancy, they end up in jail or censored or dragged before the government or a court or in a police station and threatened. I'm not saying that the West is not hegemonic, that it doesn't push out into the world. That's certainly true. I've been there out into the world and I've seen it. What I am suggesting is when you read something like this from an author that says, well, the reason that this the media in these places hasn't come of age is because it's been living in the shadow of Western models. Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced. All right, so I want you to be skeptical. All right, question number 3. What are Zhao's 5 R's? Do you agree with the author's assertion that an understanding of these 5 R's will make for a more productive dialogue in international media studies, moving us beyond the limitations of Western-centric conceptual frameworks? Merriweather, you write, the scholar describes ways to improve Chinese media efforts by rerouting the area in history, re-embedding the area in social terrain, refining agency, re-engaging with meaning and community, and recovering utopian imaginations. To me, this is the Walter Fishering of Chinese media, explore character, culture. And for those that you don't know, Walter Fisher introduced the narrative paradigm as a theory within communication studies, and I think I think he's essentially right. And others now, rising and significant thinkers are sort of taking that up. Jordan Peterson is one of them. I cannot recommend highly enough Jordan Peterson's work, Maps of Meaning. I read through the thing 3 times before I really, was able to wrap my head around it, sort of fold it all in. It's very, very, it's fascinating, but a very dense book. But it's essentially saying that the cornerstone for meaning, and we're talking about in the big sense, existential meaning, is explored by people. We don't know anything about cats and dogs. I mean, I have them. I still don't know anything about them. Explored by people through narrative, and then that shared narrative acted out as drama, and not just in the theater. That is how we interact with each other. Okay. Anyway, Walter Fishering of Chinese media explore characters. Western audiences are open to this strategy, and it's long overdue. Okay, now I really like your answer there, Meriwether, because you took sort of a hey, if you want to connect with someone that speaks a different language, speak their language approach, which we need to keep in mind. And one of the things that I was not happy with about this particular author's approach is, this sort of sidestepping, and we're looking at China here specifically, sort of sidestepping of the behavior of the current regime that is in China. The Central Communist Party, the Communist Party of the state, came into power in China, rose to power during the Second World War, and really came into the zenith of its power in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And front and center of its worldview, that is the Maoist Communist Party, is that what was wrong with China is it was too Chinese. And quite deliberately, Chairman Mao and the Communist Party unleashed on the people of China something they called the Cultural Revolution, to wash away, wipe away, expunge habits that were not compatible, beliefs, practices that were not compatible with the new communist ideology, quite brutally. It just sort of goes unnoticed somehow that under the Maoists, more Chinese and those people in satellite states, where there's Mongolia down into Tibet, were killed in these purges and forced starvations and internment in camps than were people in the Holocaust. We're talking about millions, well north of 10 million. And so, again, when I read this sort of stuff, from the late to early 20th century, saying, oh, well, we've got to have this regrounding, and okay, amen. The regrounding and the refocus and the revitalization of the history has not happened because of Western influence. It has not happened primarily, we're talking here about China, because of Communist Party state influence. So look, we've got no issue with any argument one way or the other about how to internationalize media studies. But let's not ignore the giant red elephant in the room that is the Communist Party, and what sort of effects their governance has had on the direction of not just communication studies, but the entire culture and the country. Okay. All right. Anyway, you get the point. All right. Question number 4. Briefly summarize Sabri's chapter. What, to the best of your ability to describe, is he getting at? Because this is kind of a dense chapter. So I wanted you to sort of, and likewise, when you're reading and when you're researching, if an author is unable to make herself clear, if an author, speaks in a way that is obscure and obtuse and not well focused, and you read him and you just go, what? Okay, it may not be you. Central to communication studies is effective communication. So start there by way of your critique of a source. Does it make itself plainly understood? And if not, that's a problem. All right. In the same way that, say, a lack of evidence is a problem, is problematic for the overall weight of the source. All right. Marquette, I like what you did here with this question. Is in this chapter, the author is attempting to articulate the necessity for an I've just lost your answer, for an epistemic space through which the study of Arab culture, media, and other new forms of artistic expression included could become central objects of scientific inquiry, arguing that a field of Arab media culture studies would be far more useful were it informed by and reconnected with sociological and philosophical problematics or polemics raised by contemporary Arab thought. Now, there's a really interesting school of thought on this. And on the one side, art scholars like this that say, look, we would have a firmer and more robust connection to the world if we had a more well-developed media endeavor across the Arab world, and we should get at it. The other side, still holds on to what has fundamentally been an isolationistic approach to the world within Arab culture. That is, it's a culture that embedded within the nature of Islam sees the world in a duality of dark and light, and light are places ruled by Islam, and dark are places not. And just as the analogy suggests, you don't hang out in dark places, and you don't associate with dark things from dark places. So throughout its history, major Islamic, not just Arab in the sense of ethnic, but Islamic powers have quite deliberately avoided the development of communication and media, the restricting, sometimes very aggressive restricting of materials that could be consumed by those that live under its authority, including not just what you're allowed to read, but in what forms it is. And I've been and lived and worked in a number of Arab countries, and it is nigh on impossible, for example, to find a movie theater. It's very difficult, very difficult. And the reason for that is pictures are one of the forms of communication frowned upon by Islamic states. Plurality of worship doesn't happen. So the at least historically, the center point of Islam is Saudi Arabia and Mecca, the cities of Mecca and Medina. Okay. The historically, okay, I mean, I'm a Roman Catholic as a Christian, but I'm not selling this to you. But historically, the center point, epicenter of Christianity in the West has been what's now the nation of Italy and the city of Rome. All right, Italy wasn't a nation until well into the late 19th century, 1871. But anyway, so the question is often posed: where in Italy do you find the largest mosque? And the answer to that is in the city of Rome. And then conversely, where in Saudi Arabia do you find the largest Christian church? And the answer to that is you don't, because there aren't Christian churches in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so it has an historical momentum that limits the flow of information, both in terms of what and through what medium. Okay. All right. So, Marquette, back to you. We simply cannot make sense of the modernity in the Arab world today without making sense of what it means to be modern. And if living in this mass mediated world is part of modern experience, then a philosophical discourse that ignores this is surely lacking key components of modernity. Cultural time consciousness of Arab modernity cannot be reassured if its time and consciousness solely through Cartesian doubt or thought or as historic rational school. Marquette, maybe I'd love to ring you up and tell me what you think of Descartes when you talk about Cartesian doubt. I'm curious. The discussion forum is not quite the right place to unpack this, but I'd like maybe to kick that around with you. Okay, so skipping down to the cultures, society, Arab media, cultures, and society. We will then have to begin by removing it from its discourse, making it as an object of critique making it an object for critique before it can become a tool of critique. And that's a good point too. And that is perhaps one of the most significant barriers within the Arab and Islamic world is critique is not part of the package, man. You don't criticize the central tenets of governance, including, most Arab states are theocracies. That is, politics and religion are fused together. We've had theocracies in the West, but they were train wrecks. Anglican England was a theocracy. That is, in which first, starting with Henry VIII in the 15th century, he said, I have, as the king, am the head of the church, and the church, this is the church of the state, that is Anglicanism, and the state is the church. And if you are not a member of the church, the Anglican church, then you stand opposed to the state. And the penalty for opposition to the state, treason, was death or expulsion. In large part, that's how, as Americans, we ended up here. And likewise, that's how, as Americans, we articulated the necessity to separate religion and politics, meaning there's no religious test, you belong to this faith or that faith, to participate in the state. Now, in England, for example, we've had all sorts of information about Meghan Markle and her princely husband, and on their Leave Us Alone tour. We Want Our Privacy tour. They've been, hopping around the world doing that. But anyhow, it is still the structure within the royal family of England that if and they're Anglican, and if you convert to something like Catholicism, you are removed from the line of succession to the throne. You cannot be a Catholic and be a successor to the throne of England. So it's a functional theocracy, but it's a non-governing theocracy because England's run by a parliament. Okay, back to the Arab world. Those are functioning theocracies. And so you do not criticize the central tenets of the theological construct that the government's built on, that is Islam. This is taken very, very seriously, in fact, on pain of imprisonment or even execution, depending on which Islamic state that you're dealing with. So, when might there be some critique? Good question. Okay. All right, everybody. Welcome back. Take a look at the assignment folder so you are up to speed on your second class presentation, the second part of your paper. All right. And then, by the way, so you get sort of a twofer in your final paper and your presentation, because your third presentation, which I'll post as you get closer to the posting time for your second presentation, your third presentation, class presentation, will be a presentation of a summation of your paper. Okay. So we're getting closer to the end, but things are getting more and more focused. All right, everybody. I hope you're well. Some of you have not been well, and I'm praying for you. I'm thinking about all of you. Have a great, great rest of the week, and I will see you on Blackboard. Bye-bye.